All right, welcome to our our lecture on where the Industrial Revolution began and how it diffused out from there. And the slides were actually originally designed to accompany the book Human Geography, People, Places, and Culture, and I am, of course, Ms. Gall, and I'll be your host for the lecture today. So, when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, really what we're talking about is the 18th century inventions that brought new uses for energy sources, primarily coal, not entirely, but primarily, and then new machines that were designed to improve efficiencies in manufacturing and in transportation, of which the steam engine is probably arguably the most famous. So during the Industrial Revolution, what we really see are innovations in iron manufacturing, and iron is basically a metal. And what we do is we use that to produce a whole number of products, including steam engines. And iron is a very strong metal, it's a very durable metal, and when it's mixed properly and it's created well, it can withstand a lot of pressure, which is what makes it such a useful metal during the Industrial Revolution as we increasingly are building factories and machines to do work and things like that. Along with this, right around the same time, rose up a little bit before and then concurrently with the Industrial Revolution, is this expanded trade network, and really it becomes a worldwide trade network that focuses on Western Europe and brings wealth to those in a position to really take advantage of not just the colonial system, but also to take advantage of the changes that are going on in terms of the Industrial Revolution and factories and things like that. So with the creation of railroads and steamships and other more modern forms of transportation, Great Britain ultimately enjoys even greater advantages over the rest of the world after the Industrial Revolution, significantly greater advantages than it does before the Industrial Revolution. So this is just something important to note, that Great Britain's kind of it's the hearth of the Industrial Revolution, it's the home of the Industrial Revolution, everything spreads outwards from there. And it both fuels and is in turn fueled by Britain's colonial empire, which literally spans the globe. So just a quick map to kind of help illustrate some of these points when talking about with global capital flows, right? Which is to say money going from colonies into Europe, and these are all these dollar figures are in British pounds. And what we can see is the purple are exports to Britain. Okay? Yellow are exports to the United Provinces. These days we call them Holland. Okay? The red exports to Spain, green to Portugal, and then blue is to France. And so a lot of these you shouldn't, if you know anything at all about colonial history, you shouldn't be surprised by, because the arrows are literally going from colonies to colonizer, right? So with Britain, for instance, we get the east coast of the United States, and this is in 1775, so the east coast of the U.S. is still technically part of Britain, okay, from the Caribbean. Also coming all the way around the globe from India and a little bit from China. Okay. When we're talking about France, we've got, again, with the Caribbean, and then also from India and from China, right? Spain, what we're talking about is, not surprisingly, South America, a little bit in the Caribbean, right? Portugal, Brazil, and then also the Portuguese East Indies, okay? So we don't know exactly how much trade they were getting from East India at this time period, but we know it was a lot, okay? And then when we're talking about United Provinces, again, this is pretty much Holland, modern-day Holland. We're looking at, Southeast Asia and a bunch of the islands, right? All the way through, I mean, that's really kind of their big colonial area. We call it the Dutch East Indies, okay, that's what it's called. But we're talking, for each of these countries, millions and millions of pounds of value, okay, of which Britain brought in the most. So, Industrial Revolution starts in Britain in the 17th century. It spreads out first to mainland Europe, okay. But it's important to note that when it spreads to mainland Europe, the areas it spreads to are those areas that are close to coal fields and that are connected by water with ports. Those remain crucial because coal is very heavy to transport, and so industries are more likely to locate nearer to those coal fields, especially if they require energy for what they're doing. And then also water still remained the primary method of transportation, especially early in the Industrial Revolution until the train system really gets up and running. Okay, and what we see is industrial developments in one area literally change the port cities to which they're linked. So as one area changes, so does the other. Okay, and then once railroads become much more well established and we're relying less on the river system to transport, what we see is manufacturing actually moves away from some of those coal field areas, and it moves closer to market areas and expands inside large urban areas, for example, London or Paris. Okay, and it's really the railroads that enable that to happen because they bring transportation costs down significantly. Okay. By the early 20th century, industry literally diffuses from the original hearth in northern Italy to northern Italy, which is now one of the Europe's major industrial revolutions, to Catalonia, anchored by the city of Barcelona, which is in Spain, okay, and other areas of northern Spain, southern Sweden, southern Finland. These are all heavy industry areas. We're talking about Europe itself. Again, we're talking about mainland Europe. Okay. When we look at that diffusion, what we can see is, you can see when we look at our map of Europe here, we've got some major areas, and those green dots are major industrial areas. Right, some in Britain. We've got some in the Donbas region, which is in kind of the Russia-Ukraine border area. Got a little bit in Silesia and right around the Czech Republic. Technically, it's in Poland, right? Saxony, which is in modern Germany, right around the border with France. Right, the Ruhr Valley. These are all areas where there are major coal fields, so there's major energy sources to be taken advantage of. Right, and you can kind of see, if you look at the spread of dates, the 1840s, it's really in Britain. By the 1850s, now we're into kind of coastal Europe. 1860s, now we're getting much further into kind of Central Europe. By the 1870s, now we're getting much further in, we're getting into Eastern Europe, right? And by the 1880s, really we're spreading all the way into modern day Russia and starting to almost hit the border of Asia in terms of how this is diffusing outwards. So if we talk about diffusion beyond Europe, then what we're looking at are, so our primary industrial regions in the world end up being Western Europe, surprise, surprise. Eastern North America, that's the East Coast. Primarily we're talking about, by the way, northeastern North America. So Boston, New York, Philadelphia, right, Detroit, Ontario, those areas around there. In North America, then we also see it spread to Western Russia and the Ukraine, and then also into East Asia. In East Asia, it's important to note that the big industrial area is not actually China, which is where you would have expected it originally. It's actually Japan becomes the major industrial region in East Asia. Okay, and then Western Russia and the Ukraine, it's again right around that border in the Donbas region where there's lots of coal, lots of other resources to be had for manufacturing. So when we talk about North America, the manufacturing really begins in New England, again, right around Boston and that area. Pardon me. And it starts literally during the colonial period. So Britain doesn't want the colonies to manufacture their own stuff. They want them to send resources over to Britain to be manufactured, turned into finished products, and shipped back, because, of course, that's what's most beneficial to Britain. But there's still some manufacturing that springs up in New England during this period, and especially in the period following independence. Okay, and what happens is the New England area benefits from the ability of its companies to acquire any needed raw materials from overseas sources, right, including the Caribbean, including England, even including really the southern United States. Right, is to some degree almost an overseas source because most of the shipping would have been done up and down the coast using boats rather than trying to ship it in horse-drawn carriages. We talk about Russia and the Ukraine, the growth of St. Petersburg, which is founded by Peter the Great, right, and his whole point in the city was to build a modern European city. He wants to build a manufacturing hub. Okay, so he designs the city and he pushes to attract industries, including shipbuilding. It's right on the water. Okay, including chemical production, food processing, textile making. Textile, by the way, clothes, in case you weren't familiar with that word. But Peter the Great, that's really his whole push, and St. Petersburg becomes this center of Russian industry in a way that you wouldn't expect, because it literally was built on a swamp that nobody wanted to inhabit until Peter the Great decided that that's where he was going to build his new capital city. Okay. When we talk about East Asia, we're talking about his manufacturing in Japan, which depended on raw materials imported from other parts of the world, because I don't know what you know about the geography of Japan, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% of it is mountains and volcanoes, and so it's not actually spectacularly habitable. The actual habitable area of Japan is largely in coastal plains, like the Kanto Plain, right, which, if I remember correctly, is the plain right around Tokyo. So Japan doesn't have a lot of natural resources. They're literally importing everything they need from other areas. And as Japan grows and modernizes, and as it needs more and more resources, that becomes part of the conflict, that desire for resources, and seeing what the European countries are doing in terms of their colonies and exploiting their colonies for resources and markets, that leads Japan then to try and conquer large areas of Asia on a European model. So that's been our lecture to talk about really kind of the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. We talked a little bit about its start in Britain, and then it spread outward from there in terms of how it spread through Europe, and looking at that over time spread, right, and where those major industrial regions were. Remember, they tend to be located around coal fields, because coal is a major energy source. And then also we talked about it spread beyond Europe into North America and into Asia, and what areas tended to be the largest in terms of industrialization and tended to industrialize the most quickly. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come in and see me and ask them during class. And if not, I guess I will see you the next time we have class.